Another year, another group of Avatar videos. What should I be covering this time? No! Not that movie! Anything but that movie! Hey bruh, it's your destiny to review every Avatar thing, bruh. No! I was gonna do a bit where I came in with the blue spirit mask, but I have no fucking idea where that thing went. But, it came with these swords. It's got cool-ass swords. So, where do we even begin? Well, I guess here's a good starting point. The Last Airbender movie sucks. You know it, I know it, I'm definitely not the first person to make an hour-long video essay about it. Revolutionary concept. The last time I talked about this movie was all the way back in the very first Avatar month, where I made a video discussing how I would improve the film and make a genuinely good Avatar movie, and that video has aged a bit poorly, specifically because it isn't good. On the real though, the real reason that video aged poorly is because nowadays, things are a bit different. Because now we have animated Avatar films on the way, and a live-action series that seems to be trying its damn hardest to not make the same mistakes as this movie, almost to a fault in some ways. I don't actually know if it's to a fault or not, because I haven't seen the show yet, because it doesn't exist yet. I haven't even seen the trailer yet when I'm recording this, but you know. I'm gay. The reason that I've been avoiding talking about this movie in any major capacity for so long is because there's nothing really to say about it. It's just such an easy target for any YouTube critic, especially Avatar-centric people, and anything that can be said about the movie has probably already been said by people who know way more about what they're talking about than I do. Saying The Last Airbender movie is one of the worst films ever made is like saying the sky is fucking blue. Like yeah dude, we also have eyes. Cool, yeah, thanks. Actually, the sky's looking mighty orange right now because I'm filming this when Canada's on fire, and I am close enough to that shit. We are getting the fucking runoff. The movie sucks dick, and there is no point in saying that it sucks dick because everybody already knows that it sucks dick. It's like your local neighborhood hoe. Everybody knows that she sucks dick, but nobody's saying anything. Except the difference with this movie is you don't get to come. That being said though, the reason we're talking about this movie today is because I think I finally have an interesting enough take on it, and I'm hitting it from a few different angles that I don't think anybody else has before. And if not, then who cares? Either way, you get to see me rip into a terrible movie, and that's gotta be fun for both of us. So, ladies and gentlemen, with a new live-action adaptation of Avatar soon upon us, I think it's time to take another look back at their first attempt at a live-action adaptation. So join me, MattCMG, in this excessively long video as we take a look at why the live-action Last Airbender movie is so bad. That's a sentence that nobody has ever said before. Whoa, fucking crazy. Hey guys, it's me, Moist Critical here. Today we're gonna be talking about the Last Airbender movie. This movie's a big sack of dog shit. But before we get into the real shit, I have a bit of a story for you all. I am partially ashamed, but partially proud to admit that I actually saw this travesty in theaters when it came out. Twice. I saw it once with my mom because she also liked the show a little bit and wanted to see the movie, and I later saw it again for a friend's birthday party where his parents took a bunch of us kids to go see it. In my defense, I was 10 years old and had zero taste or sense of quality, so I think that's somewhat excusable. Don't blame me, right? It's not my fucking fault. The reason I bring this up is because I think I'm cursed when it comes to movie theaters, because I always have the worst luck with that shit. Almost every movie that I have seen in theaters in the past like 10 years, with a very few exceptions, has been absolute ass. I saw the live-action Smurfs movie, Stuber, and XXX The Rise of Xander Cage starring Vin Diesel, all in theaters. Take a wild guess which one of those was good. The answer is none of them. With my strange mutant ability to somehow pick the What the fuck? I thought I was being assaulted by a fucking serpent. That's how cursed this movie is. It's causing fucking poltergeist shit to happen. With my strange mutant ability to somehow pick the absolute worst movie to go see, it only makes sense that the movie I saw in theaters twice ended up being double bad. And this is a prime example of why I don't go to the movies anymore. Piracy gang for life. Can you guys believe that the cam rip of Spider-Verse 2 has a fucking deleted scene in it? It's crazy. The Last Airbender is also the only movie that I own on Blu-ray. I do not own a Blu-ray player. I got a ton of regular-ass, normal DVDs that I don't use because I pirate everything, and just this one low Blu-ray of this piece of shit movie. I basically just own this movie for the meme at this point. What meme? I don't know. let's get on with the video. But before we get into the shitty film that sucks ass, I gotta take you back to the past. So back in 2006, Avatar: The Last Airbender was on its second season, and this was when the show first caught the eye of M Night Shyamalan, famous for directing well-liked movies like The Sixth Sense, Signs, Unbreakable, Split, and Glass, and infamous for films like The Happening and The Village. He is one of the most hit or miss directors out there, notorious for his films always having some kind of twist at the end, and that twist is often the very thing that makes them hit or miss. To sum up his career, he's pretty good at writing mysteries and darker dramas with a supernatural element to them, but not much else, and he seems to kinda know this and kinda stays in his lane for the most part. In case you could not tell, Avatar only has really one of those three things, since it's definitely not a drama in its purest sense, and while the series does contain some mystery elements, it definitely does not rely on that in any way. If there were to be a live-action Avatar film, which I don't think there should be, then right off the bat, Shyamalan should probably have not been the guy to do it, not because he's a bad director, but because his style just does not suit Avatar. The literal only reason that he wrote and directed this movie was because his kids were fans of the show, which then got him into it, becoming a fan himself, and then he went to Paramount with the idea. While this is most certainly a testament to the show's ability to appeal to all ages, it also demonstrates that simply being a fan of something does not make you qualified to make that thing. I am so glad that the fans are not the ones writing One Piece, because it would be a fucking disaster, and the same idea holds true for Avatar. But I think that actually leads into something really interesting regarding Shyamalan's involvement that not a lot of people tend to point out when shitting on it, which is that it's pretty clear to me that by no means did Shyamalan set out to make a bad film. Many fans will ignore his intentions for the sake of a joke, and like, you know, I get it, it's funny sometimes, but it's also a somewhat manipulative way of portraying things. I truly do think that he had the best of intentions, as many fans do with projects like this. He just bit off a lot more than he could chew and just wasn't really the guy for the job. It's often said with live-action adaptations or remakes or what have you that the people making them should be true fans of the thing that's being adapted, and that makes sense on paper, but I think M. Night Shyamalan is a case of that idea backfiring. In almost every interview with Shyamalan regarding this film, they always ask him the question of, "What is it like trying to adapt a 6-hour season of television into a 2-hour movie? I'm Dennis Prager and I stuff my cock with babies." And he always gives the same exact response every time. That response being, "Man, the original script was 6 hours long because I just didn't want to cut anything."
And then I spent like 40 minutes reading the outline, and then this, and then that, and then this, and then they just laughed at me and said, "You're gonna have to cut something," and I was like, I can't, you know what
Translation, I just wanted to do the show again. Clearly this was a philosophy that did not carry through. In being such a huge fan of the original series, the dude just straight up couldn't contain himself and just wanted to include everything. Obviously, the studio told him to pound sand and fix it because that's not really feasible, which is where he started to change things. He was essentially given an impossible task in the sense that you cannot reasonably fit this entire first season of Avatar, with all of its lore, continuity, characters, locations, and story beats that it has, into just 2 hours. It's just too dense for that to happen. If it were to happen, you'd have to cut stuff, and with how dense it is, you're inevitably going to have to cut something important, and that was truly where the problems with this movie first began. I'll save the story discussion for later, but the point that I'm trying to hammer in here is that The Last Airbender, despite its quality, showed that Shyamalan did seem to have some level of love and respect for the series. That doesn't mean he necessarily understood it, but he never intended to make a bad movie like some critics would lead you to believe, and I think that's very important to establish. Being a fan and getting it are two very different things, and it's clear that Shyamalan was one and not the other. If you're gonna blame anyone for this train wreck of a film, blame him, but just know that he didn't do it on purpose. I guess you could also blame Paramount for greenlighting it, but I'm not really here to play the blame game because I'm not a fucking invalid. I'm not a fucking dim-witted bitch. Now here's the obligatory part of the video where I act like every other YouTube critic and focus on nothing but the plot, because holy shit, this movie does not have a fucking plot. Which is why I'm not going to be spending very long on it, because not only has it been done to death, but also this movie just doesn't have a fucking plot. Hello, I'm the nostalgia critic. Oh, I should have done this as like a nostalgia critic parody. That'd have been so fucking epic. I'm balding too, so I fit the Doug Walker aesthetic. This story feels less like a journey and more like a collection of shittily adapted scenes with no connecting threads between them. There's just no flow to it. They try to give it flow by having narrations explaining what's going on, but that just makes the transition feel even more rough, which is kind of ironic because that's kind of the opposite of what that's intended to do. Anything magical or fun or whimsical about this universe that should be shown to the audience to give them any sense of immersion is almost completely omitted and replaced with brief 2-sentence explanations. The lore behind the spirit world, mentioned by Grand in an exposition dump with none of it actually being shown. When there is something that is directly adapted, it is in the most boring and uninspired way possible. The Fire Nation in the show isn't literally on fire all the time, but there's at least this red motif that gives you that vibe, you know? In the movie, they have some drone shot of a lush green field and just caption it, Fire Nation. Like, dude, you guys had the opportunity to make the coolest location ever and just said nah. Well, I don't think I'm saying anything new here. Literally every single thing that they adapted from the show was made infinitely worse by what I can only assume is a complete lack of care. It can't be a lack of inspiration or creativity, since that's what the fucking show is for, so it had to either be money or nobody but M. Night giving a shit. And there is no worse example of this than the way that they handle bending. Another very common criticism of this movie is that the bending is bad, and while I think most people, including myself, would completely agree, it's not really for the reasons people state, if you ask me. The effects themselves actually look okay most of the time. It's the motion and speed that take away any sense of impact of this shit. Waterbending in particular is really slow. They literally have to switch to slow motion to make it look even remotely natural, which ironically just ends up making it look worse. Like, waterbending's already a slow element, so like, why make it even slower? It's fucking stupid. In fact, almost all of the action scenes go into slow motion at one point or another, and it's just not fucking good. I think some of the only bending that looks even remotely decent in this movie is the airbending, but only when it isn't in slow motion. The movement just flows really well, and the attacks ironically feel like they have some weight to them most of the time. You know, it's nowhere near as aerodynamic as the show's version, but that is somewhat understandable since it's in live action, you know? But then they do this slow-mo shit for airbending too, and it just fucking sucks dick. It also doesn't help that the fight choreography is just absolute ass. For example, the scene of Ung and the Blue Spirit versus Zhao's troops. It's a great concept with that single shot sequence, which is somewhat impressive, but that's just about all it has going for it. They constantly switch between normal speed and slow motion, and it just looks like fucking shit. It looks like one of those shitty fucking fan cam anime edits, you know the ones I'm talking about, right? Looks like dick. Then, of course, the action itself is slow and unrealistic. Because it's one continuous shot, you can tell that the actors were waiting for the camera to get into place, which not only bogs down the action, but also takes you out of it, since now there's a bunch of Fire Nation dudes just standing there waiting for their cue instead of just attacking. Combine that with the fact that bending in general is just really slow and unimpressive in this continuity, and we have essentially stripped away the literal coolest thing about the Avatar universe. There is no better example of this than the infamous earthbending scene, in which it takes 7 earthbenders to throw one medium-sized rock. Now, don't get me wrong, this scene is bad, it's fucking terrible, but like, I also think it's somewhat misunderstood.
I'm out, man. That nigga's tripping.
The way that I personally have always interpreted this scene is that it didn't literally take 6 dudes doing a fucking conga line to float a rock, but it was really just this one dude right here that did that. I always saw their little dance move as more of a psychological thing, like, you know, they're hyping themselves up and shit and not actually trying to attack in that moment. And this kind of makes sense because literally seconds before this happens, we see one guy earthbend a whole-ass rock wall with relative ease. My point being, earthbenders on their own can still do some crazy shit even with the way this continuity slows down bending. But this leads me into the real reason this scene is so egregious. It's not because it literally took 6 dudes to lift one rock, because again, I think that's a rather uncharitable interpretation, and I can tell that that probably wasn't the intention. The problem is that, regardless of the intention, it looks like it takes 6 dudes to lift a rock, which as we've established is fucking stupid. And plus, this is your one real chance in this movie to show off earthbending, and this is the type of attack you choose? A guy throwing a fucking rock, dude? Like, I know Shyamalan had sequels planned and was probably gonna show off the actual cool stuff there, but like, holy fuck, dude. But regardless of how many earthbenders it really takes to lift a moderately heavy rock, the most egregious thing about this scene is the fact that it completely misses the point of the scene it's adapting in some of the most obvious ways possible. This is obviously meant to be the movie's version of the episode Imprisoned, in which the gang tries to help a group of earthbenders out of a Fire Nation prison. This prison is in the middle of the ocean and made out of metal, so the earthbenders cannot bend, which completely breaks their spirits. The whole point of the episode is Katara instilling hope in these people by showing them that there is still a fighting chance even without their bending. The movie's version misses every single point on every single front. Firstly, it takes away a powerful character moment from Katara and instead gives it to Ung for seemingly no reason. Like, come on, dude, Katara needed the fucking character development in this movie. God knows that's a hot commodity in this fucking shithole. Secondly, and most egregiously, they're fucking surrounded by Earth! How in the fuck are you gonna tell me that these earthbenders are broken down and hopeless when they are literally surrounded by their element and clearly have the numbers advantage? If the idea was to convey that the Fire Nation is so threatening that they can break the spirits of earthbenders in their own homes, then they've even failed at that by making them out to be bumbling idiots in the scene immediately prior to this. So you're telling me that this whiny little bitch who got up in arms about a little kid throwing a rock at him is part of the same group who made the earthbenders forget that they can bend the shit that's literally all around them? I wish I was an earthbender so I could crush my skull with a fucking rock.
Here. What's this?
Big rock?
What do you want me to do with it?
kill me.
When it comes to firebending though, that's where this shit gets really interesting. In this continuity, some changes have been made to firebending that makes it way worse. In the movie universe, firebenders need a pre-existing source of fire in order to bend, with only the most skilled masters being able to create their own fire. In an interview, Shyamalan stated that the reason for this was to even out the playing field a little bit, since in the show, firebenders were the only ones who could create their element. Ironically, this had the opposite effect, since one of the biggest and most overlooked things that made the Fire Nation threatening was that you couldn't take their element away from them. Now, you could put a waterbender in a desert or an earthbender in a metal or wooden cage so that they can't bend, but you couldn't put a firebender anywhere to take away their fire. I mean, I guess in fairness, there is the cooler, which introduces the idea that very cold temperatures can stop firebending, but Zuko demonstrates that some firebenders can just ignore that through training, and it wasn't really all that common anyways. There's also a solar eclipse, which is obviously a random and short-lived event, so that also doesn't count either. The point is, you can stop water and earth, but you can't stop fire, which added a lot of tension to scenes where our heroes didn't have their element handy while the Fire Nation always did. The movie taking away the ability for firebenders to create their own fire completely removes this very subtle yet rather important thing about the Fire Nation that made them threatening. Plus, it's just less cool, because who the fuck doesn't want to see people shoot fire out of their goddamn fingertips? I want to shoot fire out of my penis tip. Hell yeah, brother. As we all know, the characters are the strongest point of the original show. It's literally known for its character building, so it should come as absolutely no surprise that the movie absolutely does not have anything even remotely close to that. You know, I know, low bar, but it's that bad, you know? So now let's get into the characters of the Last Airbender movie, some of which I actually have some pretty interesting takes on that I don't think I've ever seen anybody else have. Firstly, something that I don't see anybody really talk about is that Ung, low-key, kinda has a character arc in this movie. I mean, it's not a good one, but it is there. So around halfway through the movie, there's this scene in which Ung is recounting how he found out he was the Avatar. It's a pretty shitty scene because he just kind of explains it instead of showing it to the audience and having some kind of visual to go with it, but sure, whatever, right? He explains that there is a ritual in which the people bow to the new Avatar, and the Avatar must accept their role by bowing back to them. Ung did not do this, reflecting how he hasn't accepted that he is the Avatar yet. This would actually have been pretty decent if not for the fact that the movie has never actually touched on this part of him at all, and reminder, we're like halfway into this fucker. Anyways, fast forward to the end of the movie after the Siege of the North. In the final scene, the Water Tribe citizens bow to Ung as a sign of respect for saving the tribe, and the movie proper ends on a shot of Ung bowing back to them. At this moment, he has finally accepted his role as the Avatar. It's kind of like a really stretched out version of what Aang goes through in the first few episodes of the series, and in concept, it's not a bad idea. This would have actually been pretty good had it not been for the fact that nothing in between these two scenes addresses this arc in any capacity. These two scenes that I just mentioned, yeah, those are the only two scenes where this is addressed at all. They attempted to give Ung a lot more depth than that, since throughout the film there are other scenes meant to show that he's struggling with a lot of other shit, but it all feels so random and with no buildup. They try to fit in dealing with the laws of his people and all that shit, but there's just no emotion behind any of it. They kind of just mention it offhandedly and then move on. As far as the other characters go, I shouldn't have to tell you that all of them are absolutely heinous versions of the show's beloved icons. Of course, they're bad because they aren't like the show, but that was kind of fucking inevitable, so I won't beat that point in too hard. More importantly though, they're bad because these new versions of the characters aren't even fucking characters in the most general sense. None of them have any kind of arc or any qualities that would make the audience give even a modicum of a shit about them, which is no doubt made worse by the terrible performances and direction. Katara in the show is a character who turns her pain into strength. She loses her mother at a young age, and this pushes her to become the nice and caring person that she is. In the movie, she's there, sometimes, when she wants to be. Movie Katara is used as a fucking exposition dump most of the time, and anytime they do try to use her for an emotional moment of any kind, she delivers it with this bland expression on her face, no inflections in her voice. It's like a fucking third grader reading her essay out loud to the class. All she does is stand there, explain the obvious, ask questions that make no sense in the context for the sole purpose of moving the plot forward, charge they phone, twerk, be bisexual, eat hot chip, and lie. Sokka is a little better because he's definitely a lot more on the nose than Katara in terms of character. Like, it seems like the movie gets him a little bit, but they still drop the fucking ball. In the show, Sokka is funny and goofy, but could also get serious when he needs to, and those two traits bounce off of each other really well. Sokka is way too serious, but they still try to have those funny, awkward moments, and they just don't work. I think a good way to put it is that when the movie tries to make him serious, they make him too serious to where he seems melodramatic, but when they try to make him funny, it just doesn't land because he's too serious. Like, I know everyone points towards that
I'd kill them all
line because of how bleak it is for what we know the character as, and I'd be inclined to agree that that's probably the best example. When he asks,
Are you the Avatar, Ong?
I legitimately can't tell if they wanted it to be funny or if it was just delivered horribly. They want the viewer to believe that he's this badass capable dude, but anytime he actually sees combat, he either gets his ass kicked, does nothing, or makes a comment that's supposed to be funny but isn't. I guess the best part about him is that he's barely in this fucking thing, but boy do they fuck him up whenever he is on screen. Sokka, more like sucka. Suck at his dick. Zuko is actually one of the better written characters in this movie, which is saying something because he still absolutely guzzles pecker, but unlike most of them, he actually has some semblance of an arc. There's a scene where he's hanging out with Iroh in some Fire Nation colony, and he's like, hey yo, if you got rid of that yee-yee-ass scar, you get some bitches on your dick. And in theory, it's a nice idea. Iroh is basically saying, hey Zuko, stop being an angry bitch and settle down and start a life, to which he denies the idea. The show had glimpses of this kind of arc, but not until book 2, so I actually kind of like that they accelerated a little bit. The problem is that it's not fucking good. Like, they try to make an arc out of this kind of thing, like, you know, if Zuko just gave up his quest for the Avatar, he could have a happy life, but at no point does he ever learn any type of lesson from it. Unlike show Zuko, they give us literally no reason to care about movie Zuko, so even if the arc was implemented successfully, the audience still wouldn't really give a shit. Iroh, or Ero as they pronounce it, is probably the least offensive adaptation of a character in this movie, probably because he gets the least to work with. Given the wise mentor trope, it's kind of hard to fuck this guy up, and they definitely do fuck him up, just not in concept. He's a wise mentor character, so he does wise mentor things. Crazy fucking idea, right? The problem with Ero is that he lacks any of the charm of the animated version. Iroh was a wise mentor, but he could also be goofy and show some real emotion. Ero is the most nonchalant guy ever. Like, he feels like he doesn't really give a fuck at any given moment. Much like Sokka, he's barely in it. Like, he mostly just kind of stands behind Zuko, so they don't have as big an opportunity to fuck him up, even though he still kind of sucks. Commander Zhao was a recurring villain throughout book 1 of the show, so for the movie, he serves as the primary villain. And shocker, they don't adapt him well either. Zhao is a character who can be calm and calculated, but his temper leads him to lose control over the situation, and he's just an all-around intimidating presence. In the movie, he's just mildly condescending, and feels more like a spoiled bitch than he does a true villain. I also find it kinda hard to call him a villain, since I don't think he has a single scene with any of the main gang. I guess it'd be the Gung. You know what I'm talking about?
My name is Gung.
Anyways, they don't interact, and most of his interactions are actually with Zuko, which I guess works a little bit since their relationship in the show was always more interesting, but our heroes don't have any real context on this guy. Also, his death scene is so fucking bad. In the show, he is killed by the Ocean Spirit as revenge for what he did to the Moon Spirit. When Zuko tries to save him, he denies it because of his pride and ends up dying. In the movie, the Ocean Spirit thing never actually happens, so Zhao is instead killed by a group of random waterbenders as Zuko and Iroh just walk away. This not only makes Zhao seem like a pussy-ass bitch for being taken out so easily, but also misses the point of his relationship with Zuko. He also never gets promoted to Admiral in this, which is a really dumb criticism, but it pissed me off because Admiral Zhao just rolls off the tongue better than Commander Zhao. I don't know why, I think I'm just all fucking autistic.
It's Admiral Zhao!
And lastly, we have Fire Lord Ozai, played in this version by Cliff Curtis, who I only know as Travis from Fear the Walking Dead. I only bring this up because anytime he was on screen in this movie, I was thinking, wait a second, I've seen him before, and it was the fucking zombie show. Kinda crazy that they cast him as a human in that show, and his performance in this movie is much more zombie-like. Nothing against him though, because even though he did not do this character justice, it's the fault of the writers. Let's be gay for a second. In the show, Ozai was more of a force than he was a character, and he has purposefully not shown much in the first 2 seasons for this exact purpose. The audience needs to understand who he is, but we can't know too much about him too early because that ruins the suspense of his final showdown. The movie writers seem to have completely missed the point of this, since he is in several scenes throughout it with absolutely nothing special or interesting about him. And if they wanted to change things and introduce him earlier, that's completely fine, but when you introduce a villain, typically that's done in some grandiose way that shows you why he's the villain, you know? It gives you a reason to be interested in him. In this, he just kinda casually shows up in the most uninteresting exposition scene. A big deal is not made about him when he is the guy we're supposed to be afraid of for the next 2 movies. I don't know how they butchered a character that was barely in this fucking season so badly, but they somehow fucking managed.
Hey guys, it's me, no bullshit. Today we're going to be reviewing the Last Airbender movie. Now everybody knows that this movie is very bad, however, I think there's actually a few good things that it does. For starters, all of the cast are white people, which is way better than these fucking minorities. This is very good because it is not woke.
The cast being whitewashed is another big point of contention with this movie, but honestly, I think that's the least of its fucking problems. Now don't get me wrong, it's definitely not a good thing that almost all of the main leads were white people. White peepo. Shouts out my white peepo. The characters were intended to be of a certain culture and a certain race, so casting actors of that culture and of those races is only appropriate, and giving those roles to white people just takes them away from underrepresented groups, and the seemingly purposeful change in the pronunciation of their names feels like it misses the point. It's actually really fucking ironic how the main cast is almost all white people, when Shyamalan has actually stated in interviews before the movie came out that he wanted to keep the characters as culturally and racially accurate as possible.
For me, this was an incredible opportunity to be culturally diverse and be organic at the same time.
Meanwhile, the Fire Nation is made up of a bunch of fucking brown guys of indiscernible origin, when in the show, they are much more similar to the Japanese.
Japanese, the great Japanese, right?
We all love Japanese.
The background characters seem to be of the right culture, at least in the Southern Water Tribe, but unlike the original show, the movie doesn't give us any type of idea of what these cultures are actually like. Anyways, the problem with the casting isn't necessarily that they are whitewashed, which, let me reiterate, is a bad thing. The problem is that the cast, fucking sucks. No, I am not here to shit on anybody's acting ability. You know, I'm no fucking actor, I'm just some guy on the internet, but dude, some of these people are straight up just not fucking good. While a good portion of it does go down to their direction, bad directing can only take you so far. Let's look at some examples, shall we? The first scene of note is when Katara greets Ung in the igloo. Nicola Peltz is not emoting at all. She sounds like she's literally reading the script aloud for the first time. Noah Ringer is trying to emote, but he's giving off the complete wrong emotions. You know, this isn't supposed to be a happy moment for Aang. He's supposed to have very mixed feelings about it. These two just aren't matching the tone of what the scene should be, and they can't even match each other. It doesn't feel like a conversation, it feels like a fucking interrogation. There's no chemistry between these two. And I don't know if it was the directing or the editing or what, but the flow of this conversation is just way too fast, and it ends up being pointless anyways because they end up saying nothing of value. Oh, how'd you get here? Frozone. Are you sad? No. It's not fucking good. Oh, hey, also, Nicola Peltz, if you're watching this, sup, girl? What's going on? Hey, you were in this piece of shit movie, but, you know, that don't mean shit. You still kind of cute though. How you doing? Nah, I'm just joshing you. Victoria Justice has my heart. The earthbending scene is an example of how the movie handles comedy, and it doesn't work at all either. Like I said, when Sokka asks, "Are you the Avatar?" I can't tell if they intended it to be funny or not. And later in that same scene, Sokka yells, okay. Everyone can help us now! And in theory, this could have been pretty funny. You know, I could totally see the real Sokka saying something like that, but it falls flat because the delivery is so flat. I could literally go on and on about all the badly acted scenes in this movie, but we'd literally be here all day because it would be every single scene in the movie. But I do actually want to give props to two actors, Dev Patel as Zuko and Sean Tube as Iroh. Or Iroh, I guess. These two are legitimately good actors and unironically give it their all in this movie. They were just kind of given a garbage script with garbage direction. There are scenes with these two, whether they're together or not, where you can see some emotion shine through. For example, let's look at the scene where Zuko and Iroh say goodbye when he sneaks into the Water Tribe. It's a much shorter scene than the one that they're adapting, but they still get that emotion across of an uncle concerned for the only family that he has left. These two actually emote in this movie. Like, they're unironically good actors, but again, they're just kind of given shit to work with. They give the best performances of the film, but that bar is not very fucking high. While the direction is certainly one reason for why the acting chokes cock, I think we'd be remiss to not talk about the dialogue. This shit is fucking ass, dude. Of course, there's the explanations. Characters just stand around and explain shit, even when it makes no sense in context to be explaining shit. None of these scenes feel like characters having a conversation, they feel like actors explaining shit to the audience, which is exactly what this is. When they aren't explaining shit, the conversations just don't feel natural at all. It feels like they wrote this to be able to hit certain story beats, but didn't actually connect them in any way, so there is no flow of ideas in any of the dialogue. They change shit from the show that was perfectly fine and had no reason to be changed, and they even add in lines that make everything way more melodramatic, and that's assuming that drama is even something this film could even achieve. For instance, when Zhao is about to kill the moon spirit, he says,
We are now the gods.
What kind of Sonic.exe type shit is this? This whole scene is actually a really great example of how bad the dialogue is. It takes the basic lines from the show, but dumbs them down for what amounts to no actual reason, and on top of that, they don't even make sense phonetically. Yeah, that's right. We're hooked on phonics today, bitch. So Iroh says,
There are certain things humankind should not tamper with. The spirits in the spirit world is one of them.
Well, that's not one thing, dumbass. There's two things, but sure. He then says,
Stop, Zhao. The world will go out of balance. Everyone will be hurt.
This is worded the way a fucking toddler would explain it. Keep in mind, the original line here was,
We all depend on the balance.
which got that exact same point across much more succinctly and sounds much wiser, as it should. The entire movie is just filled with dumb changes like this that make no fucking sense. If they had just ripped the dialogue straight from the show instead of arbitrarily dumbing it down, then I'd have significantly less of a problem. Actually, maybe not, because then they'd be butchering these iconic lines, and frankly, I won't stand for that. And frankly, I will not stand for that. I go to Oxford University and I suck cock. And honestly, that's one of the least egregious changes this movie makes, since this movie adapts and subsequently disrespects some of the most iconic scenes in the entire series. And I'm not one of these fucking film bros who takes movies too seriously and exaggerates things for no reason, so I do not use the word disrespect lightly. We briefly mentioned their awful adaptation of Imprisoned and other iconic scenes, but there is far worse out there. I have seen this movie more times than a human being reasonably should, but something that I noticed on the rewatch I did for this video was how much it disrespects one of the best episodes of the season. Of course, I'm talking about about episode 12, The Storm, an incredibly important episode that details the backstories of Aang and Zuko that are integral to understanding their characters. Again, I don't use the word disrespect lightly because the amount of times this movie downplays and ignores the importance of this story beat is genuinely fucking heinous. Like, I don't think I've ever gotten mad when watching a movie, but this genuinely pissed me off in my most recent rewatch. In Aang's very first scene, he explains to Katara the events that led him to the iceberg. He more or less gives us a brief 2-sentence rundown of the storm, which would be fine if they intended to come back to it later and or if it were placed somewhere else in the story. But they just kind of front load you with this information without ever really exploring the emotional aftermath or the ramifications of it, and they do this exact thing at least 5 different times throughout the movie with both Aang and Zuko. They just casually mention the events of that episode without ever going into why it actually matters, or better yet, showing the fucking audience, which would immediately give them a sense of why it matters. They treat this super important story beat as a throwaway line Easter egg, and it fucking blows ass. I think the worst part about this ignoring of the storm is that the movie adapts the following episode's A-plot almost beat for beat, albeit incredibly rushed, that episode being the Blue Spirit. The reveal at the end of that episode that the titular masked man was actually Zuko the entire time, as well as Aang's speech at the end about him and Zuko being friends, only works if you've seen the previous episode. You know, they work in tandem that way. But the movie just straight up fucking ignores it. The movie tries to do the Blue Spirit, but without ever having touched the storm in any meaningful way, which not only misses the point of both of those episodes, but they're also just adapted badly to begin with. I think this further illustrates one of the biggest problems with this movie, which is that a lot of the time, it kind of expects the viewer to be familiar with the show, and as a result, just can't stand on its own. A lot of the time, shit will happen in this movie and will never be explained or addressed, but they seem to expect the audience to know what's going on because of how the show did things. The main reason that this movie has such spastic pacing and all these plot holes is because they expect the viewer's knowledge of the show to fill in the gaps, but didn't really think or care about how people who haven't seen the show would know what the fuck is going on. A prime example of this is the Kyoshi Warriors. According to an interview with M Night Shyamalan, the Kyoshi Warriors were intended to be in the second movie that obviously never ended up happening. If this were the case, then why the fuck are the Kyoshi Warriors only vaguely shown for like 5 seconds in a scene that didn't even make it into the final cut? If you're going to introduce them, then just introduce them. In fact, the exact shot of this deleted scene was used in a montage in the movie, but that Kyoshi Warriors have of it is just completely cut. Why would you feature these characters in this super indirect way with the intention of including them in the next movie? Perhaps the scene was cut because a more proper introduction would be in order later, but knowing how this first movie went, I can't imagine that would have gone well. My point in bringing this up is to show that this movie really relies on the show's existence for anything to make sense. Like, if this sequel were to have ever happened and he was going to introduce the Kyoshi Warriors, I'd imagine that they would just casually run into Suki and then just recognize her without them ever actually meeting on screen because it happened in the first movie, but didn't actually happen in the first movie because it got cut. But it happened in the show, so they know what's going on. No. Stop. It's for this very same reason that they don't actually write fucking character arcs in this movie. They expect the audience to apply their knowledge of the show's characters onto the movie's versions, so they write in the big character moments but without any of the context or reason for the audience to care. I already tore into the characters ad nauseum, so I won't repeat myself here, but this is definitely a big reason for why they ended up the way that they did. I think one of the worst adaptations and general changes made in this movie is the introduction of the Dragon Spirit as a new original character. He seems to be taking the place of Avatar Roku and being the one who gives Aang guidance, except absolutely nothing about him makes any sense. Firstly, why this and not Roku? Live action versions of the past avatars would be a no-brainer for a fan of the series to want to adapt, and would no doubt be important in establishing to the avatar versions in the audience how the reincarnation cycle works. Replacing their role in the story with a generic CGI dragon is quite possibly the most boring way they could have handled this. What's even worse is that this dragon is not fucking helpful. He literally just shows up in Aang's dream for no reason, never introduces himself or says why he's helping him, then just sits there and says cryptic shit. The one time he does try to be helpful is in Aang's final meditation journey into the spirit world, where the dragon tells him the most contradictory shit ever. He basically says, hey, guess what? You weren't there to help your airbender friends and you're responsible for their deaths, you fucking dumb bitch. And then immediately says, you need to grieve them. As if that's at all, like, relevant. Like, you can't tell him that it's his fault and then also to deal with it. Like, that's not how that works. This also makes no sense considering the genocide of the airbenders is barely mentioned in this fucking movie. When Aang asks him how to defeat the Fire Nation, the dragon tells him, the Avatar doesn't hurt people. And then in the literal next sentence tells him, go see the Ocean Spirit, he'll help you hurt people. As if those two things aren't incredibly contradictory. Ironically, this advice doesn't even end up mattering, because Aang doesn't even get his power from the Ocean Spirit. He just activates the Avatar state and makes a big water wall that scares the Fire Nation away for some reason. This dickhead is a walking contradiction, and it's not even in a clever or intentional way. This character was a waste of time, and so is this fucking movie. This movie is a fucking travesty, and it's an affront to God, and actually God should die. I'm also very gay. If I had to give this movie props for anything, It wouldn't be much, but there are a few things that I don't actually mind about it. Firstly, I actually really like the way the airbending tattoos look. In the show, they're just like these filled in solid arrows, like somebody took the fucking paint bucket tool in MS Paint. But in the movie, they have like intricate little designs that make up the arrow, and the paint itself is a lot more faded and not as pronounced. I think it looks way more realistic since I have seen cosplays and shit where dudes try the solid arrow and it almost always looks fucking goofy. The arrow has always been something that doesn't really work in live action, so I'll give the movie props for actually looking decent. I am also saying this before I've seen the live action thing, which is supposed to be revealed in like a couple days. So maybe it looks good in that. Hey, future Matt, if it looks good, make a thing about that, you dumb bitch. Speaking of props, I actually really like the glider design in this as well. It's way more complex and ornate looking than the show's version, which is basically just a stick, and the toy that they made of it in real life was way better than the show's toy, even though it's just a fucking PVC pipe with foam around it. More generally speaking, some of the only good things that anyone has to say about this film are that the score is pretty good, it had a pretty decent game on the Wii, and apparently the manga kinda slaps. I can't speak on the latter because I haven't actually read it, but the first two I have some pretty heated opinions on. I'm gonna have to agree with the consensus on the music because this shit fucking slaps, dude. It's nowhere near the same as the show's music and it carries a completely different tone, but it goes pretty fucking hard. Like that main theme of like the dun 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 dun, or the waterbending theme where it's like fucking James Newton Howard is a fucking madman. He went off on this one. As for the tie-in video game for the Wii, I have seen more than one Reddit post in my day where people said that they actually liked it. I don't have any proof of this, and I don't know if this is a widely agreed upon thing, but I have actually played this game. I don't think I have it anymore, but I somehow came into possession of this game as a kid. Tried playing it, but my brother and I literally could not get past the first level because anytime we tried to walk into the hallway where the game was literally telling us to go, we just fall through the fucking floor endlessly and the game would crash. So yeah, fuck this game. It fucking sucks dick too. At the end of the day, this movie fucking sucks.
It sucks. It sucks. This movie fucking sucks. It sucks. It sucks. This movie fucking sucks.
But like I said at the very beginning of this video, we all know that it sucks, so what's even the point? In this day and age, it has become ultimately futile to talk about this movie since the consensus among literally everybody is that it's one of the worst movies ever made. It has become a meme in the Avatar community to pretend that this movie doesn't even exist. You know, there is no movie in Ba Sing Se, you know, all that shit, right? While funny, I think shit like this is actually really dismissive in a very particular way. This film is remembered solely for how bad it is, for literally no other reason, and I think it's pretty dangerous for the future of the series and even film as a whole to pretend that it doesn't exist. The Last Airbender is a really shitty movie, but we need to remember it so that we can never make those same mistakes again. This is a philosophy that the people behind the live action series seem to be taking into account, since they are really taking their time to make sure that they don't make the same mistake that this movie did. And while I don't know if they succeeded in that or not, since this show isn't out yet as I'm writing and recording this, and probably isn't still out by the time you're seeing it, I think it's pretty thematically fitting that Avatar has always been a show about learning from your mistakes. Shit movies will always be made. There will never be a time in human history where bad movies are not a thing, but there can never be good movies if we don't also have bad movies to learn from. The Last Airbender is a stain on the Avatar franchise, but without it, I don't think we'd appreciate the good parts of the franchise as much as we do. But yeah, that's it. I finally talked about this piece of shit movie. I don't know how else to end this video. I got more videos coming down the pipeline this month. Hopefully you guys will like them. They're very long videos coming out this month, and it's gonna be sexy. It's gonna get sexy this week. It's gonna get sexy. Let's get fucking sexy, dude. Let's get motherfucking sexy. Anyways, that's the Last Airbender movie. What are we doing? I'm the Matt-stalgia critic. I remembered it so you don't have to, and I'll see you guys next week. Thanks for watching.